Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Jimmy. Good to see you.
Hey, Andrea, how are you?
Very well, thanks. And you? So I added a few things to the agenda for today, but feel free to add to it things you may want to discuss. Am I sharing the right screen? No, probably not.
Yeah, we saw the hacked MD document.
Oh, yeah? Oh, okay. So it was the right screen. Okay. The Zoom bar confuses me all the time. It goes on some random screen. Okay. Right, let's wait one more minute. Start. Okay. Yeah, let's get started. So welcome everyone. Feel free to add yourself to the attendees participant list. So today is July the 20th. This is the CDEvents working group. Yeah, the meeting is recorded so that you know. So I added a few updates on the agenda for today. So let's go quickly through those. Oh, hi, Brett. Python SDK, so these are taken from the CDEvents. I don't know, I can just report in here. So first goal for the Python SDK is to get parity with the Go SDK and then evolve it from there. And the current work is ongoing on a fork of the repo. I don't know if Eric has anything you want to add to this.
Well, not really. You can go there. There is a branch. Yeah, I've already shared the link to that branch called Skeleton Project. So I got a demo from my colleague who is working on this the other day. I think it needs another T at the end.
Yeah.
So what he's able to do is to use to send CDEvents using the CLI. So the CLI works almost exactly as the Go SDK CLI, and the intention is that it should work exactly the same. And then that can be received by a Go client running the Cloud Events SDK to just see that, yeah, this message makes sense and is a valid Cloud event. I think this is really just the first step, though, for the Python SDK, just to bring it one-to-one on par with the Go SDK. I think there's a lot of things we can and should do in the Python SDK to make it more, yeah, make it useful more as a library rather than just a CLI. So library will be the main goal of it, but we're starting with just one-to-one parity to get a good starting point for it. yeah, work is going to continue actively for some time at least. So depending on exactly what we set as the goal for the Python SDK, I think it should still be done before the, or well in time for the 0.1 release. So yeah, I think that's the main update. What I hope we can show or add a little bit later is some good getting started guides if people want to test it out for themselves, but we're not quite there yet.
Thanks, Eric. Is there any plan to bring the fork back into the CDEvents org?
Yeah, I think Tarek, my colleague, just wanted to have his own little program to start with. He had some things he wanted to clean up, like there were some dependency issues and things like that. But I think once it works properly, then I think we should definitely go back to the CDEvents project and work from there.
Cool. Thanks. All right, next on the Spinnakers POC, the PR is merged on the CDEvents side, and also Jalander implemented the ability to use a variable image SHA on Spinnaker's side, so it's great. On the website, I just wanted to let folks know that I set up like a nightly job that picks up the spec, the latest spec, and publish it on the website. So that's all automatically updated now. We have an upcoming presentation at the Open Source Summit Europe, Eric and myself. So we got a link to the chat there if you're interested. It's going to be about the metrics POC. And in terms of the formatting work on the spec that I've been doing with updates to lower camel case and so forth, and currently working at the CI bucket, got the work in progress PR there, and I just continue to go for the doc. So this is mostly look and feel type of change. So hopefully it should be pretty straightforward. In doing this, I realized that there are a lot of missing parts into the model. A lot of events, they're pretty bare. There's nothing defined in there. So yeah, we have some work to do. Yeah, that's it. I don't know if there is any update on the Java SDK or on the GitHub webhook to CDEvents work. But yeah, I don't see Jalander or Mauricio, so probably not. Oh, welcome, Vipa. Yeah, so then I had a couple of points for discussion on the spec. One is about the build events. The other one is about the CDEvents content mode. Yeah, I don't know, shall we get into the discussion for those, or is there anything else people would like to bring up?
I think discussion sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. So the first one is about the data model for the build event. So the reason I opened this issue while I was looking into the metrics POC. So this is about producing DORA metrics for CDEvents. And so what we need to do there is to be able to correlate events from different stages in the code build, deploy process, and the CD process to extract those DORA metrics and know what information like how often are we deploying and how long it takes for a change from when it's developed to when it gets into production and so forth. And in trying to build this model, I realized that the build event don't really contain anything apart from the build artifact ID right now. And I was suggesting that we could add the repository to them and also the last change or some kind of ID that represent what is the state of that repository when the build was made. Yeah, so we had some discussion with Eric and Matthias on this. Yeah, so I think if I understand correctly, and Emil and Matthias, you advocate for not adding the repository information in the events, and I wanted to understand better understand why and discuss this in the meeting today.
Yeah. So yeah, it feels a bit strange to actually have a repository information. If you have, if you already have a change event, or you have somewhere where you have the repository information, to actually have it that in the build event. Whereas, yeah, so that was the kind of like this start of the discussion. But you had some questions and opinions there.
Okay, so you say if you have if you have the change that includes the repository already.
So it sounds for me it's more logical of actually referring to the change event instead, rather than actually duplicating this information in to an event. If that makes sense.
There's a question there. I don't remember exactly, but I think typically when we talk about a change, we're talking about, or we have two things. We have a change proposal, which would be like a pull request or a merge request or a review. And then we have the actual change, which would be something like a commit or a set of commits getting merged or something like that. We are not talking about a merge request here, right? We're talking about an actual commit or something like that. Is that correct? Just want to make sure that we don't assume that the only thing we build are merge requests or pull requests.
That's a good point. I would say it would actually be the real change, not the pull request or merge request.
Yeah, that's good.
However, you can, of course, you might need to build if you're inside a PR, you might need to build there before you can actually do the merge. If you
there could be some verification or something like that. Absolutely. But then at least every code review system that I know of, it does boil down to there being some commit you can point to, and that would be in GitHub or in GitLab, it would be the latest commit in a branch, I think, and in Gerrit it would be one commit. But yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. In Gerrit, you also have a commit you can point to.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'm just thinking about how the events would be sent. Because obviously we do have an event called something like, no, I don't remember how we did it. I know we discussed like a change is just a change proposal until it gets merged. But here, if we want to build, then we actually want to build for a change. So I'm not sure if we send the appropriate events. We probably should. Like if you either, in the case of Gerrit, if you replace the commits that review points to, or in the case of GitLab and GitHub, when you add another commit to the branch that the review points to, do we send change events for that, even though nothing has really changed? It has changed, of course, in the review, but not in the sort of any of the main branches or anything like that.
That's a good point. I know we had this similar challenge internally, and we're currently capturing the repo push events effectively, as well as any of the key PR related change events. And our mechanism, how we're correlating these together is in the build, not necessarily capturing in the compilation or build that might happen. It's really the clone event that comes down. We obviously have the last change that will be tied to that build, and that's how we're correlating them from those SCM events to the pipeline clone event. If that makes sense. It's a tricky one, but I found we didn't want to overcomplicate some of the Git related functionality, but it's just trying to understand all the permutations that can happen on the branch versus how we tie it really to the asset that we're building at the end of the day. That was one of the things we were trying to relate to, if that makes sense. But
yeah. Because in a general sense, I think I would say it makes sense that if we are sending all the change events that we need to be able to link to them, then it might be better to link to those change events rather than repeating a repository and what we want to call last change or something like that. But we should also, of course, allow for not having to send change events, because you might want to start sending events at the build stage. I think that should be okay as well. And then perhaps especially if you're talking about things like GitHub or GitLab or things like that, where you have the source code externally to your own team or to your own organization, but you do the builds and things internally. I know that happens in Volvo Cars a lot, that we have source code in GitHub, but it gets built by Zool internally in Volvo Cars. So the first thing that would happen is a build. So I think maybe something like what Andrea proposed is, there are some use cases for that as well, but it's of course always tricky, like what is mandatory and what is not mandatory. And if it's not mandatory, then the system that wants to correlate that information would have to support both, I guess, both looking for a previously sent change event or reading out the repository and commit information from the actual build event.
But will you have enough, or the inclusion of the build information or the repository information, the build event, is that for, who is it for? Is it for knowing which repository it is, or is it actually being able performing the build? I'm wondering a little bit on the level.
So the idea, I think, for the metrics perspective is to be able to say what commits are included in this build that wasn't included in the other build. Like, what are the new commits that are included in this build? Because that will help us calculate this lead time for changes. So if there is a change, like someone has created a commit, how long does it take until it's included in a build that is then eventually deployed or sort of put into production? That is the metric that we want to grab.
Okay, so if you have, if the build builds one commit, but then you have 3 more commits before that wasn't in part of a build, then you still need like to traverse back.
Yes, you would need to go and ask the source control system, like what are the, for instance, by doing some sort of history diff, like what are the commits that are included in this thing that I'm building now versus the last thing I built. So it definitely gets a bit tricky if you want to look that information up afterwards.
Okay, so then this information that we include in the build events might not be enough sufficient.
I think it would be sufficient, assuming then that you do have some other piece of logic that goes and asks the source control system for, like, given this repository and this commit, what am I actually building? What commits have been included?
Okay, so we don't want events for that, so you can only take a look at the events to try to figure it out.
I would say probably we do want events, but what I'm probably getting at here is that I don't think it should be required to send events for every commit to get this lead time for changes working, because if we do allow the build event to say, here is what I have built, then we have enough information to be able to look that up. Not just by looking at the event store, of course, you would have to go and contact the source control system to ask additional questions.
Yeah, and I think some of the APIs are different. And to your point, you have the to and from, right? That would allow you the ability to look that up on Capture.
Yeah. Unfortunately, as you say, Jamie, the APIs are different, so that's something that maybe in future we can try to drive, getting like a common way to ask this question to different gate hosting system. But yeah, for now, I think the best we can do is to at least have that information from the events. One thing that I wanted to add about the need of having this information is that first, actually two things. So first is about links. Until now, we have not specified them, but we plan to. But we plan to specify them as an optional feature. At least that's what we discussed last time in the community event. So that we don't require anyone who wants to implement CDEvents to must have like a repository with all the events stored in. So that would be an optional feature of the protocol. So that's the current status I have in my mind. So when I think about fields that we need, not necessarily mandatory, but that we may need for building this POC, I make the assumption that we may or may not have that repository. And the second thing is that even if we do have like all the events in a database, I think for routing and filtering purposes, it's good to have at least a basic amount of information like repository, for instance, because if I want to say I'm interested in all the events that are specific to a certain repository, and I have a build event, and that build event does not tell me what repository this build is about, just to do filtering, I would need to go and look up into a database to see if this event is related to something that is interesting to me or not. And I think that's a no-go in my opinion.
I guess the risk of going down that road is that you might have unlimited amount of these information that you want to have in the routing. Because at some point you might be looking for, well, I want this, I'm only interested in the builds on this branch or something detailed. And then you want to include those ones in the build ones also. So yeah, I get your idea, but we should be careful, or at least states have some kind of methodology on what the information we include to know how deep we're going to go in this information, or how much we want to introduce. So at least if we're clear on why and how we're thinking, so people understand it and then what the limits are, then we can go for it. But we still need to document these limits.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not saying that this should be mandatory. I'm just saying that I think it would be good to have it covered by our data model, so that if we want to send this information, then we have a common way of sending it. Otherwise, yeah, we can't really consume it in a standard way. If this information is provided by different system in different formats, then it's hard to consume. Okay.
One question with this POC, and we're pointing out the commit. So basically, we are only talking about building from source code that is from text, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by that. That's yes, another comment that you made.
Because it can be that you build, yeah, when you build a binary, include other binaries. For example, like I guess that if you're building a language that has compiled libs, and you're saying, okay, I want to kind of like statically link this, so I don't dynamically link it, then you will include this library, which then is a binary, and that binary might not be stored in your Git source code. It might be stored in like a JFrog repository or something else.
Yeah.
But if we're for the POC, we're only aiming for source code build, and let's at least just document that one so and people understand that this is, we're limiting the scope here to do Git commits.
I don't think we are limiting the scope. I mean, at least in my experience, when you have this kind of dependencies, you will have in your repository, or you will document what is the list of your dependencies, and that list of your dependency with the version is versioned along with your source code. It makes sense. I'm saying, okay, I've got this source code, and in this version of this source code, I use version 1 of this static linked library and version 2 of that static linked library. And that is not stored in the Git repo, but the version that you choose to use is. Right. So
okay, so you're thinking that you have to have basically all your versions and so on that you're building have to be in a Git commit. So you have if you want to step a binary or something here, then you should check it in a Git.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you should check in the binary itself in Git.
No.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
just the so people are aware that it's, you're kind of requiring that you read your binary dependencies from a Git commit.
Yeah, well, do you have another mechanism in mind that you think is used that we should consider?
Well, I'm not too sure that, for example, that all the builds, for example, in Ericsson, where we build together things, is something that's actually like stored in a Git commit or something. But it could be that we send in AFL, we have a composition defined events where we define a number of compositions, and such event can point to other artifacts. So we have it documented there, and then we build from that. So it's not always that all dependencies are stored in checked in a repository where you have all the links to it. So that's the reason I'm asking.
Okay.
Did it make sense?
I'm not sure I understand. So when you make a build, you will have the source code and you will have binary dependencies. So where do you define which version of the source code you build with which version of your binary dependencies?
It might not be defined inside a file. It might be defined at in some other process that you're saying, okay, we want to have. We have talked about baselines before. We want to define a baseline, so we have a tool that says, okay, I want to have these versions, and that's the baseline tool that has the idea of what you've built, and then in order to track what versions are put together, we send this composition defined event. And then when we build an artifact, we can point to this and say, okay, this composition defined event was what we built. But this composition that we're creating doesn't necessarily be stored inside a file inside a Git repository.
I see. I understood now. Okay.
Matthias, there's a question to you. I think if I remember correctly, there aren't really any build events in Eiffel, right?
No.
Even when you are sort of running a compiler to produce a binary from source code, that's still a composition. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically. we have artifacts and then we have compositions, and they can be like pure binary builds or like packaging or something.
Yeah, and a composition can have source code as content, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm
That's
just
correct.
wondering if that is like how we want to deal with that. If we want to consider the actual, like when you're producing or transforming source code, if we see that as something other than combining already transformed source code. I'm not saying they should be different. I'm just saying we need to take a decision, I think, whether we see those as is build and packaging the same thing, or are they different things? Maybe that's what I mean.
I guess like language like C, where you have both dynamic linking and static linking. I guess in those cases you would be you would both have source code and binary and combine them to something.
Yeah.
Whereas if, for example, if you have another language, I can't really think of one right now, whereas maybe it's a pure, you only have like source code you build together. But Eric, haven't you talked about that you also have had a situation where you combine a group of like a baseline or something, and you do something on it, and that is
Absolutely.
not necessarily checked into a file? Or did I misunderstand there?
No, that's perfectly true. So for instance, like when you want to do a multi-level integration verification flow of some stuff, then typically maybe the first thing that happens is that you compile something from source, or in our case, you might get something like an already built binary from a supplier. But when a new version of something, a new version of a binary or an artifact is added to the system, then a whole lot of things kick off. You want to include that new binary version in whatever compositions it should be part of to be able to be tested. And then we build a lot of things that we would then call baselines. And then baseline can contain other baselines, etc., etc. So the path from an initial code change up to something actually being considered released, which would be what we're talking about here, lead time for changes, does include multiple steps typically of just packing things together in more and more complex combinations and then verifying that. So even though things might start with a compilation step or what we would then refer to as a build, most of the work is actually done in baselining or composition handling on the way. I guess that was what you were referring to, Matthias.
Yeah, precisely.
And I would guess the same is true for what Ericsson does, Matthias, is that the compilation sort of happens one in the beginning, and then you're satisfied with just treating it as an artifact and then including it all over the place.
Yeah, so we have a similar situation where we're grouping things together into more and more complex packages, as you described.
So somehow the way we've thought about it a little bit is, so we have a concept in something I presented a long time ago, where we say that when we build something, which in our flow is called creating a component, which is roughly the same as an artifact, then we say that a component is created from things in different repositories of different versions. And then we don't say that the repository version is necessarily a commit or even a source code management system like revision. It could also be like a version index in some database, or it can be a document version or whatever, but something that has a version so that when we go look for it, we can extract the exact same version again. It could be a composition version as well. So I think what Andrea is proposing would still be quite generally useful to say that, okay, when we built this thing, we went over here and got this version, and that is what we included. So that is what we have. And then just say that the version doesn't have to be a commit. It can be anything that is version handled, because that I think is a reasonable requirement. We can't just say we went over here and took the latest thing, because we don't know what the latest thing was when we did it.
But are you intending to put all this information in the build, or would that be more suitable to put it in the artifact?
We are connecting it to, not really to the build, we're connecting it more to the artifact. We haven't really thought about event that much. But when you go look at the, I guess for us, an artifact is a file, and a file can exist in many different places. So a single component, as we would call it, can have multiple artifacts. But if we talk about the component as an artifact, like this is the thing that was actually built, and that is the thing that would have a reference to multiple repositories and multiple versions. So it would be the final result of the build step or the transform step or whatever you want to call it. So I guess, yeah, connecting it to the artifact would be more true.
So I guess that is the, as I'm from my film, probably I'm thinking that those terms that it feels more natural to, as we have a composition event, to state what was built includes in the composition event and not in the build event.
And I guess for the metric, it doesn't really matter that much, because what is being deployed is not the build job, it's the result of the build job. So as long as we can track it from there, that should be fine.
Yeah. Now you have to stop me if I'm going too deep, or if you don't follow me. But the question is, if you want to, in your metrics, want to trace, for example, this is a deployment here, and I want to see what commits were part of it. Do you actually need to traverse and look at build jobs then, or would you just want to look at like the artifact? So you say, okay, in this deployment, what artifact is? And you look at the artifact, and then, okay, in the artifact, what was part of this artifact? And then you take a look at that one, so you don't need to take a look at the build job at all. Are you following me at all in this conversation? My train of thoughts.
Yes.
So in that case,
my personal preference would be that I would say that the artifacts should hold this information. Yeah, and then the artifact could possibly also reference the build that built this artifact if you want to find the artifact itself should, it might be referenced. It has been built from.
Yeah, I think I got you. There was a bit of we were breaking up a little bit, but I guess you were agreeing with me there.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want more explanation of it, I could probably take a look at. I have posted a picture in one of the issues here. If you want some more picture-wise explanation of what I'm talking about, the rest of you, that is.
Yeah, I mean, for the initial POC, or at least but for the events that we have now, and we don't have a concept of composition yet. And I was hoping for the initial work to avoid getting into the idea of composition, because it adds a lot of complexity, and the amount of time and effort that we have to put into this is limited. So I just wanted to start with a simple use case of a single repo, assumption of a single repo where we're doing builds. And then, of course, adding more sophisticated use cases.
But we still have the artifact already, right?
Sorry, what was that, Eric?
Do we still have the artifacts? Because the build produces an artifact, right? Even in our simple flow here.
Yeah.
So I think maybe it would be sufficient not to introduce any compositions, but to just say that the artifact is what should contain links to what it was built from. I think that is Matthias what is described.
Yeah, for me that sounds more logical.
So then we wouldn't need to introduce compositions. We would just have to think about the artifact node what it was built from, rather than the build node what it needs to build.
Yeah, for me that would be more logical. Andrea,
Right.
are you following our train of thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm thinking, sorry. And so you're saying in the artifact packaged event, or artifact published event, right?
Yeah. So for example, if the artifact packaged event would have this information of what of what source code and so it contained, that would be more logical than actually that the build event would have it.
Okay, I mean, I can see how that information would also be there. Yeah. I'm not sure if it will be more logical or not, but yeah, I think I tend to agree that what we need is information. Specifically for the POC, we need information more about artifact being produced rather than builds being executed. And it's probably a good degree of overlap between the builds and the artifact events. But I guess different events might be more interesting for different use cases. So like, yeah, so if someone is more interested on the pipeline type of view, then the build event is probably more relevant. If, like in our case, we're interested in the artifact, it's the artifact event that is more relevant. Okay.
Just from my point of view here, are we assuming that artifacts could be built outside of the build pipeline? To your point, is that because for me, the way we've been looking at this is there's a deep correlation between the SCM events to the clone events that are happening within the pipeline to tie that lineage, which would then be tied to the artifact SHA being produced in the pipeline to help us with this correlation. And sorry if I'm misinterpreting some of the previous discussion, but how would we tie in the manifest of the like to your point commits, or how that asset was built otherwise?
Good questions. You're not misinterpreting. You're questioning us. That's good.
No, because I sort of tend to agree with Andrea on this. The simple use case at the end of the day, if multiple binaries could theoretically be built, like the artifact that's being built could be consumed with multiple things or a simple thing, right? And if we it's just really how that composition model we want to look at it. I was like Andrea, maybe for the simple use case, going at everything would be coming from it's assuming that micro views in place, that any artifact would be tied back to the build process that we could easily correlate to the SCM. It just that makes sense to me, because otherwise there's an infinite number of possibilities that gets hard.
I guess what's me and Eric talked on lastly was that we do want to correlate kind of like clone events or maybe the SCM and so on, but we don't know if we want to involve the pipeline So if you're looking for deployment, are you actually interested in what pipeline this was running, or are you more interested in what SCM events or SCM Git commit was contained in that one? So that was a discussion.
Gotcha.
So Andrea, if you could click on the link that I posted on the chat there. Just want to spend a couple of seconds here. So this is an actual image where we have the SES, that's the source change, and the CD, the green CD, is then the composition I talked about. We don't need to deal. ArtC stands for artifact created, which is artifact packaged, and then ArtP is artifact published here. So I want to, here is my idea that I want to be able to link the published event back to the source change without going through all the blue ones, which are can be in the pipelines, which can be tests and so on. So that's why I wanted to have a quick pass through, and that was my reason or idea behind maybe not including this in the build event, but have the artifact package instead.
Yeah, I see what you mean, Matthias, but I think, I mean, if you're interested in using the build event, I think in my mind, I associated to what Jimmy called the clone event. So it's associated to the beginning of the pipeline that is producing the artifact. Then you will need that information in there as well, right? So it depends, okay, which route you go through, but I mean, it's fine. It makes sense to have that information in the artifact as well, but I don't see why it shouldn't be in the build event too. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to trying to.
I mean, I get your point from if we only have a build, that would be if the build event only represents builds, but then it might be all the other things that you might do this might not be building, but in this Anne-Marie's PR will all the steps, there are a bunch of other things that you might do that I guess would be also maybe be sent as build events if we don't create extra events for those ones, of course. So yeah.
Okay. So I'm thinking, what is the next step here? So maybe I can make a proposal for extending the artifact event. Or both the build and artifacts event, and we can discuss on that PR then, if it makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds like probably a good way forward.
I mean, yeah, I would like to be able to move forward with at least a simple model. I understand that there are a lot of complications, like subtleties, like we discussed in the beginning, like the difference between the change or a specific commit. What do we want to track, and yeah, all the possible composition models and so forth. But I would like to at least have a simple model to begin with that we can experiment with in the POC, and then yeah, as we make the application that we use in the POC more complex, and maybe yeah, we depend on multiple repositories or use more external dependencies, or yeah, we can build then the scenarios. We can adapt the model to fit that.
Yeah, that sounds very reasonable. My question, maybe a little bit provocative, is do you actually need build events if you want something very simple?
Yeah, I don't know if you need the build event in the POC. Go and check that, but we do have them in the spec for now. But yeah, yeah, I'll need to think a bit about if we need them at all. We may not need them. You're right. So if we just for the sake of the metrics, but I need to double check.
Yeah, I was trying to help you make things simpler. Sorry if I'm not getting you there, but just trying to help you on because I do understand your idea of making things as simple as possible, which for a PC to get something running. So that was the idea of just using the artifact just to get something through.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we associate the artifact directly with the repository and the source version, or the version at the source, then I guess we don't need, in that case, the build. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, okay, but I think we have a way forward in this. So we could use artifacts for the metrics POC. So I will propose some changes for the artifacts model then, so that we can use it. There. Okay, we only have 7 minutes left. Yeah, so there's another point of discussion that I wanted to bring up. Don't know if we have enough time to discuss that, but I think we covered already a bit of it, so maybe it's not too long. Basically, we discussed in the past, or mentioned in the past, about having multiple modes for CDEvents, which would kind of similar to what CloudEvents is doing with HTTP binary mode and structure mode. So in CloudEvents, you can have with the HTTP binding, you can have a binary mode where all the CloudEvents information is stored in HTTP headers. And then the body is reserved for like vendor content. And then there is the structure mode where the cloud event itself information is sent as a JSON, and that JSON then embeds any vendor content that needs to be sent. And I think it would make sense to have a similar approach for CDEvents, assuming HTTP binary mode for cloud events, which I think is what we considered always to have, like the cloud events information in HTTP headers. And then we could consider both having a structure mode where we have things like meta or subject expressed as JSON within the payload of the message, and then having a data field where we embed vendor data. And as an alternative, have a binary mode where we would have like things like the CDEvents, meta, the subject, links when we introduce them, everything in HTTP headers, and I try to draft an example of how it could look like, and then having the vendor content in the as a payload. So I think we have previously discussed this, and I think there was some agreement on having these both options. The advantage of the binary mode is, especially for places where there is already a format, like even in terms of project, if you look at Captain or Tecton or Jenkins, they already have some cloud events with their own format. So in binary mode, it would be possible to have the CD events information added in CD in HTTP headers format and preserve the original payload, which means that on the receiving side, like clients that do support cloud events would be able to benefit from the cloud events, so CD events information, sorry. While clients that do not support CD events yet would still be able to work with these events because the payload would be the same as they would expect already. So that's kind of the rationale for having these two options.
So one question here. Now, maybe I'm wrong here, but isn't the idea of using the CD or cloud events that you don't have to care about the kind of the transport layer thing? Because it struck me now when we were talking about HTTP, but maybe someone prefers Kafka or AMQP. Should we really talk about each of those modes and talk about this in our spec? If you follow my train of thoughts here.
Yeah, but I mean, we could do similar consideration for other type of transports.
Yeah, just so we don't go too deep into something. Whereas, I guess the idea with cloud events is the transport part of it is agnostic, so you don't need to care about. It should be really simple to switch transport protocols. So we shouldn't be need to care about that. That's why we want to build upon cloud events, so we can take our seed event and send it regardless if it's HTTP or Kafka or MQP.
Yes. So this is not something that changes the kind of data model of CD events or anything, but it's even if you're agnostic in the spec, agnostic of the transport, you still need to define a binding to that transport, right? So I think you still need to say, okay, when you're sending a CD event on top of cloud events, how do you do that? Because you actually need to send these events, so you need to define those formats. And even cloud event supports multiple nodes, so we need to kind of define how CD events map onto those. And when we do that, I mean, we can do that in a way that is more useful for like a transitioning into CD events. And that's what this is about. So like, if I'm trying to implement CD events in Tecton, for instance, or we try to use existing events from Captain when doing the POC, and having this approach, I think it's very much useful. And in fact, it's what the Go SDK does right now, kind of. It stores all the CD events and information as cloud events extensions. But I think it would be good to formalize that and have these two options. Or, I mean, we could say we just do the binary version, or if you think that this structured version has no value in that. I think that in my opinion, the binary version is oh, we are at time. It's good for transition. The structure version gives more flexibility in the data that we can transport, and also it's probably more readable. But yeah. Anyway, I'll try to make a proposal about this. And if we agree that we want to do these two formats, we need to define in the binding side the format of the HTTP headers. So how they would look like in practice.
Yeah, sure. But we probably should do not only HTTP, but some other one if we need to define those bindings. And maybe something that's rather odd or that doesn't look like HTTP or can be translated easily. But I think it's a good idea to define it.
All right. Well, we are at time. So thanks for joining today. And yeah, looking forward to our next meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.